U.S. Speaker Nancy Pelosi's touchdown in Taipei earlier this week was tracked by millions across the world, not only because it marked the most high-level political engagement from the U.S. to Taiwan in 25 years, but more importantly, because it heightened tensions between the two leading economies of the world. The visit was a brief one, during which Nancy Pelosi met the Taiwanese president, pledging an ironclad commitment to democracy on the self-governing island. Now, what follows is an intense rhetoric from a furious China on multiple fronts: military, diplomatic, and economic. It has launched the largest ever military drills in the waters around Taiwan, restricted trade with Taipei, and summoned American and European diplomats to protest against their criticism of Beijing's threats. So as frictions escalate, how big can the fallout get? What will be the implications for the region and for the world? That's the global debate. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teena. Joining me is a distinguished panel of experts to carry forward the discussion. So it's my pleasure to welcome four gentlemen from different parts of the world to this special debate on Sansad TV. Mr. Robert S. Ross, Professor of Political Science at Boston College and Associate, John King Fairbanks Center for Chinese Studies, Harvard University. Professor, thank you for your time. Welcome to Sansad TV. The second guest we have on the panel is Mr. Chong Jia-Ian, Associate Professor, National University of Singapore. His teaching and research focuses on international relations, especially IR theory, security, and most importantly, Chinese foreign policy. Mr. Yan, welcome to Sansad TV. Thank you for your time. The third guest is Dr. Chien-Hui Wu from the Institute of European and American Studies, Academia Sinica, Taiwan. Dr. Wu, welcome to Sansad TV. And for the benefit of our viewers, let me tell you all, he's earlier worked as an advisor with the Ministry of Justice in Taiwan, and his research interests now mainly cover EU external relations law and international economic law. And finally, Mr. Thomas J. Shattuck, Global Order Program Manager at the Perry World House. He was earlier the Deputy Director of the Asia Program at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. And his research focuses on cross-strait relations, Taiwanese and Chinese domestic and foreign affairs, and also the U.S. role in East Asia and the Indo-Pacific region. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on this edition of the Global Debate on Sansad TV. I would like to begin the program with Dr. Wu. Dr. Wu, U.S. Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan was a, much televised affair. People across the world tracked her touchdown to Taipei, and in more ways than one, it was a very, very significant visit coming in from the third most powerful leader in America. But give us a sense of how the people of Taiwan actually looked at the visit by Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan, and now looking at the manner in which China has been retaliating. What is the sense, what is the mood like in Taiwan? Are the common citizens, worried? Is there fear among people?
Okay, I would say the vast majority of people in Taiwan, they are quite welcome the visit. And you can even see the 101, they have this signal, Taiwan love US something. So the vast majority of people in Taiwan, they do welcome this visit because it has been such a long time since the former chairperson, spokesperson in the Congress visit Taiwan. It was something like 25 years ago. And of course, we do envisage the retaliation from China because China has always managed when officials from other countries they visit Taiwan. So the retaliation would be more or less envisaged. Probably we would not expect China would attempt to do military exercise. But the military exercise began yesterday, and it would continue today and less maybe tomorrow. So far, people in Taiwan, the large majority of people in Taiwan, it's more or less business as usual, no panic at all. Maybe it is because we have been under the threat of China for so many years. So more or less, the situation does not worsen it does not worsen the relation between Taiwan and China. Neither does it alter or accelerate the tension between the cross strait. So far, people here, I think most of them, we are quite calm, even with the military exercise.
Okay, but
I think, but compared to other world, other part of the world, in Taiwan, people are relative calm.
Okay, but of course, on the other side is a fuming China, Professor Ross. The manner in which it's retaliating has, of course, brought once again US China relations to an all-time low. How is America looking at this crisis building up? Do you see, in the manner in which now China has launched the largest military drills around Taiwan, could it touch a point of no return?
I think the United States, I think, expected Chinese retaliation of some kind. These things are always unpredictable. But of course, the White House tried to advise Speaker Pelosi not to go to Taiwan for fear of the Chinese reaction and the difficulty for U.S.-China relations. The Chinese will be quite careful to avoid escalation that would elicit U.S. responses that could risk war. They've done this in the past. They've been quite careful. The Americans call this gray areas. The Chinese will have quite coercive policies toward Taiwan, but avoid provoking an American military response. Dr. Wu, I think, is right. Life is going on normal for Taiwan as we speak. And I think we can draw lessons from the policies China adopted toward South Korea, Philippines, and Vietnam in the past, where I don't think this is just a one-off. We're going to see, for the next year and a half, 2 years, gradual choking of the Taiwan economy, persistent Chinese military presence around Taiwan, periodic exercises. Mainland's in for the long term now, to squeeze Taiwan and to explain to both the Taiwan leadership and to the Taiwan people that they have crossed some lines that are going to incur strong Chinese reaction that will inflict pain on Taiwan. And if Taiwan needs to find a way to get along with the mainland, manage cross-strait relations, if they want their economy to continue to prosper, and if they want to avoid heightened security concerns with the mainland.
So, Professor Yan, given the escalating frictions in the region, is it right to say, and can we say that it's Taiwan and not the United States which is ultimately going to pay the higher price for the kind of atmosphere that's been set, the tone that's been set by Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan?
Well, the PRC has been putting pressure on Taiwan for a while now. Right. So really, since after 2014, when there was the Sunflower Movement, where people in Taiwan, they rejected getting more integrated into the PRC economy, allowing the PRC to have more of an influence in Taiwan politics and the economy. So that rejection brought increasing pressure on Taiwan. We saw the stopping of tourists. We saw increasing restrictions on Taiwan imports to China. And subsequently, there were ramped up military activity. This includes naval patrols. This includes military flights. So what we see with this current round, the missile test, I mean, they've had missile tests closer to the PRC coast before. Here's a sort of extension, but I mean, the capabilities were there. It's certainly a ramping up of the pressure by an increase in intensity, but I think ultimately the type of pressure is, it's not different. It's just a stepping up of what's already there. So in that light, I think there are two things to observe. One is that with economic pressure, Professor Ross had mentioned earlier, South Korea, Vietnam. I throw Japan in there. They bore the brunt of PRC pressure for a while. They then tried to divest. I mean, they're still around. They're trying to figure their way around. And one of the side effects is that in all these places, the wariness of the mainland has increased. And I argue that's also what's happening in Taiwan. So there's going to be a lot more pushback, friction between Taiwan and the PRC. I would also add that with a lot of these threats and efforts to coerce, insofar as they're not being carried out, right? People get desensitized. So we see in Taiwan, life is pretty much going on as usual. So what that means is that to have that same effect, right, the PRC would need to step up the pressure, which is indeed what we're seeing now. And that would have to keep continuing until such point that the PRC either has to carry out its threat or have its bluff called, both of which carry some risk for Beijing. So I think that's sort of the trajectory that I'd watch.
Okay.
I think that any suggestion that this is going to be business as usual would be highly mistaken and quite costly. There was concern in the Philippines about China, and the Philippines compromised with China. There was concern in South Korea, and Korea compromised with China. There were anti-Chinese demonstrations in Vietnam.
Okay.
And
So,
Vietnam compromised with
Professor,
China.
we'll come to the reactions and the implications in the region in just a short while from now. But let me bring in Mr. Shattuck into the discussion. Mr. Shattuck, looking at the manner in which friction is escalating, it is, of course, going to have implications on the region. It is, in fact, having some kind of implication on the region, about which we'll talk in a while. But the fact is that if China is going to exert all kinds of pressure on Taiwan because of the fallout of Nancy Pelosi's visit, the question is that when the United States does not officially recognize Taiwan as an independent country, will the country go to the extent of being involved militarily?
That's the million-dollar question that has plagued analysts and government for decades now, since the United States severed ties with Taiwan in the late 70s. President Biden has been a lot more forceful in his belief, the U.S. commitment to defend Taiwan. People have believed that he's misspoken, but he's now said it 3 times that he personally believes that the U.S. had commitment. So under him, there is potentially less gray area for that defense of Taiwan. If Biden is not reelected in 2024, we don't know what the next president will say, but at least under President Biden, it seems like the U.S. is going in that direction. Now, that does not mean the U.S. will actually do it. It could just be an off-the-cuff remark, and he's not saying the fine points of U.S.-Taiwan relations, but saying something 3 times over a course of a year points to what he thinks is commander-in-chief. Now, to see how the U.S. responds over the next week, month and year to the Chinese pressure that's going on right now with the missile test that actually went over Taipei last night. So, it remains to be seen what Biden will do in the short term, but at least in the long term, he has made his own personal views quite clear.
Dr. Wu, coming to you, because it's an important point. Is that what has given hope to the Taiwan leadership? Because what we have seen is the Taiwanese president, in fact, coming on record, appealing to the international community to help end China and the hostilities, the provocations that it has been involved since Speaker Pelosi's visit concluded. So how do you interpret that kind of appeal by the Taiwanese leadership? And which are the countries that actually Taiwan hopes to get help from in case China, attempts to do what Russia did in Ukraine?
Basically, of course, under the TIA, US have some more or less security commitment, which is to provide defensive weapon to Taiwan. I think this is largely people outside this island will believe Taiwan relies so much on US. But the point I want to point out is in the past few months, especially after the Ukraine and Russia war, the survey in Taiwan, the last almost 50 to 70% of percentage of people in Taiwan under the survey, they are willing to fight for this country, this island. So I think in addition to the help, expecting US would provide some assistance, whether they provide some defensive weapons or they send their troops to Taiwan. The other sources of security or defense comes from the people in this island. There are more and more support for Taiwanese people to strengthen their military defense. And of course, the leadership under Tsai Ing-wen, she's also thinking about to extend the military service. So from my perspective, of course, we rely so much on the U.S., but it cannot be neglected that people in Taiwan, they are more and more willing to fight for themselves.
Okay, Professor Yan, looking at the kind of history that the United States has had in Afghanistan, which is, of course, a close neighbor. So the kind of hope and the trust that Taiwan has on the United States, but looking at its history in Afghanistan, in Vietnam, a lot of analysts have questioned the reliability factor of America. What is your opinion?
Right. So I think there are a couple of points here. One is the credibility of the U.S. commitment is always going to be called into question. I think in the case of Taiwan, the U.S. would also be cognizant that its allies in Asia and perhaps beyond will be looking at how it responds to Taiwan. And in order to figure out how they themselves calibrate their relations with the U.S. So to the extent that the U.S. seems uncommitted, it could see its alliances wavering a little bit. So I suppose Washington will have to factor that in. They will have to figure out how important those alliances are to the U.S. And certainly we've seen different administrations have different perspectives on U.S. alliances. The previous administration was a little bit more willing to perhaps have some distance. The current one probably less so. So as we look forward to the next election and whatever will happen there, that can see some change. And also I'd like to add that a lot of the economic pressure stuff that we see, economic pressure, it has an effect, but it can take a while. I mean, look at what's happening with Russia right now. Given the multilateral sanctions, right, it's still fighting. So if you look at North Korea, if you look at Iran, the sanctions there haven't ultimately got them to change direction. So I suppose the unilateral economic punishment that the PRC is putting on Taiwan with U.S. support and support of others, and insofar as Taiwan's able to get its commercial side still going, might take a while for the PRC to really have an effect. And Taiwan is a more robust economy, of course, than say the Philippines.
Okay, but of course, it's a lot more dependent on China, and going forward, how is that going to be impacted? That is something that will come back to you, Professor Yan. But Professor Ross, a related question about America's role, about its credibility and the kind of hope that Taiwan has on the country now to defend itself in the face of an aggressive China. Now, the question is, even though, Mr. Shattuck spoke about the Biden administration's comments, not once or twice, but thrice on Taiwan, the question is about the public opinion on Taiwan. How willing is the public in America to actually intervene in, helping Taiwan defend itself? And also the fact that, is it in the best interest of America looking at the state of the country's economy?
Well, I think the likelihood of American intervention to defend Taiwan has declined in the last 20 years. It was easy to say we'll support Taiwan when the mainland had no air force and no navy and minimal missiles. Today, the cost of defending Taiwan would be extremely high, and the outcome would be uncertain because of the difficulty of operating in the Taiwan Strait or even to the east of Taiwan in the West Pacific. So the cost would be very high, and the ability to help Taiwan defend itself would also be minimal, unlike Ukraine, because the ability to supply Taiwan by air or by sea would be difficult in the context of a war going on around the waters of Taiwan. So we see the United States reaffirming its commitment, but what we're trying to do is to compensate for the decline of American military with cheap talk, you might say, or language, to try and strengthen our reputation, even as our credibility is declining because of our declining military capabilities regarding the mainland. Now, the region, we worry about credibility, but the region is probably more worried about America's reputation as creating conflicts that would drag them in. So we see caution around the region, except for perhaps Japan, saying we hope this doesn't escalate and the two great powers can find a way to restore stability because they don't want the United States, because of Nancy Pelosi, to draw them into a war over Taiwan. So America would do more for its alliances if it would show some moderation rather than extreme commitment to Taiwan that might risk war. The region doesn't particularly like Nancy Pelosi going to Taiwan, and it doesn't want a hardline American policy that refuses to try and manage the Taiwan issue. American public opinion is difficult to gauge. The public opinion says, would you want to support Taiwan? And the answer is frequently yes. but it doesn't say, would you support them by going to war against the mainland? We don't know how American public opinion would respond. And we should remember that public opinion is frequently, almost always, a minor voice in policymaking inside of the White House or inside the leadership of Taiwan or the mainland. So yes, the people on Taiwan may not be particularly happy with the mainland, but the leadership on Taiwan knows that the risk of war with the mainland is not mainland occupation. It's not the taking over of Taiwan. The risk of war is that missiles and aircraft rain on an island and destroy their democracy, destroy their economy, destroy their infrastructure, while the mainland doesn't touch foot on the island. And those are costs that Taiwan is likely unwilling to run simply to say Taiwan is a sovereign state that is not part of China, regardless of who the government of China is.
I mean, of course, that's something that Taiwan has been fighting against since decades.
Yes.
Well, perhaps, the worst fear of the people have now begun to come true with the manner in which China has been, aggressively retaliating to Speaker Pelosi's visit. But of course, in the best interest of the country itself, in the best interest of the world and for the region particularly, it's important that, peace prevail. And for that, let me go across to Professor Yan once again to understand the regional implications of the kind of, friction that has been escalating in the region. Professor Yan, what are going to be the long-term ramifications beyond Taiwan?
Right. So I think a couple of things to watch. I think, with all due respect to Bob, the region has the public opinion in the region is far more varied, and elite opinion is far more varied. I think there is at the base a willingness or a desire to see the U.S. and China get along because there's a view that the U.S. has a stabilizing role to play in the region, and to have a PRC that is overly domineering could be detrimental to the autonomy that regional states would like to enjoy. So that's, I think, the baseline. Now, the question is, how far would that calibration go? There would be some people who would definitely agree with Bob, who say, look, the U.S. being overly provocative is not a good idea. Others who say, well, China's being a little bit too forward-leaning. So I think between these two positions, what we see is some friction within the region. There may be some thought about, okay, how are we going to calibrate our economic exposure? Are we going to divest? Some countries, some companies are going to do that. Others are going to say, well, look, China's the way of the future. We have to sort of go there, and perhaps we can link some ties with the United States. So that's still an ongoing and very live debate. I mean, if you just look at the ASEAN meetings that are ongoing right now, there was some effort to encourage all sides on the Taiwan Strait to back down. Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, didn't particularly like that. He walked out of the dinner. So, how this calibration is going to go is going to be pretty complicated. It could make the region far more tense. It could sort of embroil various regional actors in the ongoing U.S.-China friction. And so I think that creates room for quite a lot of uncertainty.
Absolutely. Mr. Shatak, the kind of importance Taiwan holds not just for America in this region, for, of course, other regional players in the Indo-Pacific region, but also the fact that it is the hub of the semiconductor industry. More than half the world is dependent on the Taiwan chip industry for our everyday electric items. So, of course, the fact that it does not come under the control of hegemonic power is going to be in the interest of the entire world. And this is where global leaders have to come together. How do you look at the entire situation now building up, and the other leaders, apart from America, coming together and looking at a possible solution?
The G7 released a statement condemning these, which I think was very important to show the world's leading democracies and economies that they were not happy with the provocative action, in particular the shooting of the missile over Taiwan. It's one thing to shoot missiles in the Taiwan Strait. It's a completely other one to shoot it over another country's sovereign land, and particularly over its capital. So seeing the international response to that is encouraging, but it's in the interest of everyone, obviously, that war does not break out over Taiwan. It would be destabilizing for the world economy. The Taiwan Strait's one of the busiest waterways in the world. Shutting that down would have huge ramifications for supply chains, which are already on edge with what's going on in Ukraine and COVID issues. And as you said, Taiwan is the home of the world semiconductor manufacturing. So if you take Taiwan semiconductors out, it would be devastating for the world economy. We wouldn't be able to have this conversation without Taiwan semiconductors. So having peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait is very important, and making it to China to not make such provocative actions. Like, it's one thing to have Nancy Pelosi visit Taipei. It's another thing to shoot a missile over the same city. So having both sides keep things as calmly as possible without overreaction is the critical move. And we're seeing, even beyond the G7 statement, countries individually, like the Japanese are coming out against this. The new foreign minister in Australia recently came out also and tried to say, let's all breath and calm down. So these messages are encouraging, but if China perceives these messages as just being rhetoric, not backed up any sort of commitment, then maybe there will be more of these drills, in the Taiwan Strait region in particular could be more vulnerable in the future. So we'll have to see what the United States and G7 nations decide to do to back up their rhetoric with action, whether it's just supporting Taiwan further economically, since we're seeing all of these boycotts and bans on different parts of the Chinese, or on the Taiwanese economy. It would be incumbent upon the US and the others of the G7 to make sure that those issues are offset by further trade. And it would also then decrease Taiwan's dependence on the mainland, because it is still the case, despite the Tsai administration's efforts, Taiwan is still very economically dependent on China.
Certainly,
so
and that's a very significant point that you've made, Mr. Shattuck. And let me take a quick intervention from Dr. Wu on that.
In the past 2 or 3 years, the trade volume between Taiwan and China, in fact, increased. But the reason because of this is because the shortage of semiconductor. So because China it has to import a lot from Taiwan for semiconductor industries. And the reason for this is because the sanction or the export control measures imposed by US. So China has to secure its import source of semiconductor from Taiwan. This is in fact, I would say China is more dependent on Taiwan. Taiwan is more dependent on China. This is the first point I want to mention. And the second point, again, it relates to semiconductor. Why the vast majority of semiconductor industry is located in Taiwan? It has some economic reasons. It takes a lot of talents, and it takes a lot of efforts. In Taiwan, the engineer, they work something like 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. It is not possible in Arizona, to be frank. This experience cannot be translated in US, in European Union. It is possible in South Korea, in Taiwan, but no more in US, in Europe, and no more in Japan. So the only, I would say the US effort or European Union efforts to try to revitalize their semiconductor industry, it would be inutile, because it takes so many working hours and cheap labors. This is what cannot be found in US, in Arizona.
Absolutely, that is something that the entire world is dependent on Taiwan for. We're all, dependent for all of our everyday gadgets on this very important chip that comes from Taiwan. And for that,
Yes.
of course, Taiwan is very, very important, not just to America, not just to China, but for the entire world. And that is where the entire discussion comes into picture, not just for its geographical location, but for its significance for, providing us this very, very important chip. So that having been said, time is running out. I'll have to wind up this discussion today. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on the program, sharing your perspectives with us and our viewers. Absolute pleasure having you all on this edition of the Global Debate on Sansad TV. Thank you very much once again for joining us on the program. So that's it from us on the Global Debate today. Thank you, viewers, for your time. I'll see you same time next week now with another topic and a different set of panelists. Until then, take care of yourselves and keep watching Sansad TV.